Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Today I'm going to be talking about card design. Some people, myself included, many times, get overwhelmed by the choices. There are just so many different things that you can do and you don't know where to start. So what I thought I'd do is share with you my thought process when I'm creating a card, the different steps that I take, and then the different design considerations that I think about along the way. So the first thing that I do is I figure out what tool and technique I'm going to use. The tool is either a stamp or a die, for example. And what I've done is I pulled a bunch of cards that I've created recently, and I'll show you examples because I think it's better if you can look at it. So, for example, I purchased this Penny Black stamp last year, and I knew I wanted to do something with this stamp. So that was my first step. So then I've got my tool, and then I had to figure out what my technique was. And I decided I wanted to do light ink on a dark background, so some kind of night sky. And with those two, I ended up with this card. So that's an example of that. I had this Avery Elle stamp set, and I knew I wanted to use this, so I started with this stamp set. And then the technique I decided was to use pigment inks and heat embossing. So knowing I was going to use this stamp and the heat embossing with the pigment inks, I came up with this card. You can see it's got all the raised up heat embossed areas. Okay, so that's tool and technique. I had this stamp set from Hero Arts, and I thought it'd be really cool to use paper piecing. So knowing I was going to use this stamp with paper piecing, I came up with this card, all the different pieces. And then finally, here's an example of a die. So I had this die from Simon Says Stamp, and I thought I would use the Sizzix adhesive sheets and some glitter. So I knew that was going to be my technique. So starting with those two things, I ended up with this card where it's got the die with the glitter on it up here, so you can see. Anyway, so that's step one, tool and technique. All right, step two is color palette, which is one of the most important steps in the design process, because if your colors are not pleasing to the eye, it doesn't matter what technique or what stamp set you're using. So what I generally try to do, and I don't do this all the time, but for the most part, I pick two colors, possibly a third. If I do pick a third, it'll be in a very small amount, and then I have a neutral, and maybe even two neutrals. So let me just give you some examples. So this is a card I created recently. My colors here are dark blue and yellow. I did add a third. It's got some green leaves here, but it's a very small amount, as you can see. And then my neutral is the browns and the owl. Okay, that's one example. Here's another one. My two colors here are pink and orange, and my neutral is black. So that's all the color I have here. And these stars are actually the same colors as the balloon. Okay, this is another example. I've got blue flowers and green flowers. Those are my two colors. I did introduce a third color in a small amount, which is the yellow on the inside of the flowers, and then my neutral is the black. Same thing here. I've got green and blue as my two colors. I did introduce a third color in the cherries, so a small amount of red, and then my neutral is this brown in the foil wrappers. Okay, so you know that it's good to use a small number of colors, but then you're wondering which colors to use, right? I actually, a lot of times, use colors that are close to each other in the rainbow. So, for example, these cards that I did for Penny Black, this one is red, orange, and yellow, right next to each other in the rainbow. This one, blue and green, right next to each other in the rainbow. This one, blue and purple, right next to each other in the rainbow. So if you stick with those colors, they're colors in nature, and so they're pleasing to the eye. Sometimes I'll use all the colors in the rainbow for this one example. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and I keep them in that order because you don't want to mix them up because that's how the eye flows. Here's another example where I used every color in the rainbow. It's, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and I used them in that order. And one other note about the color is that I almost always have some little bit of black or brown in every single card. And I can go back and show you all the ones I just showed you. So I have black in the stems here. I have the black sentiment, the black outline. Here's black strip along the side, black strip along the side, same with that other one. With this one I have black outlining here, and I've also got the sentiment in black. This one has black. This one has black in the background. This one I did not use black. Well, I used black in the owl stamp. And then this is almost black here with my dark blue sentiment. With this one, I used black around here and black in the top and the bottom here. This one, I drew a black line around the outside. So anyway, I could go through all my examples, but I do have a little bit of, most often black in the cards. And the reason why I do that is because it creates contrast. So it just creates that little extra pulling together of color by creating a contrast. Anyway, so that's a tip there. Okay, now as far as figuring out which color to use, so let's say you know you want to use purple and blue. The best thing to do is to create tools to help you. And I've created several tools to help me, and I'll show you just a few of them really quick. I created these little color swatches of each of my ink pads, and I don't have all of them in here, just the ones I use most often. So I have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and neutral. So I do group them by rainbow. And so when I want to figure out, let's say I know I want to use a red, I'll just take my binder clip off, and then I can just spread them all over the table, and I can really see all my colors at once to figure out, you know, which one I want to use. You know, some people put them in a book, some people put them on a ring, but I like to have them all spread out so I can kind of move them around. And then if I want to say, okay, put a green with it, I kind of go through my green and say maybe that one or maybe that one. And that way I have the freedom to just, you know, put them wherever I want and mix and match them. And then when I'm done, I just group them back, I put them in the binder clip, and I put them back in my container. Another thing I use is the Stampin' Up! Color Coach, which is very helpful, and it has a little card for every color that the ink pads come in. So let's say you decide you're going to use Wild Wasabi, one of my favorite greens. You can look on the back, and it'll show you Wild Wasabi with two different color combinations. These two, the So Saffron and Perfect Plum, or you can use Marina Mist and Early Espresso. So I've actually used some of the recommendations that they have because I think they're pretty good. But sometimes I want something else, and so what I'll do is I'll say, okay, I want the wasabi, so I pull that out, and I go through some other ones, and maybe I say, oh, I want to try that with rose red and see how that looks. And maybe I want to throw in a little bit of yellow, but I don't want it to be too strong, so maybe So Saffron would be a good combination. So anyway, you can pull these out and play with them. That's really nice to have too. For Copics, I took my favorite color combinations and I colored some flags and I put them on here. So if I'm going to like color an owl or something like that, I can look at this and say, oh, okay, I want it to be these kind of browns, or maybe I want it to be more of a yellow brown, and I can pull those colors in my Copic marker collection. Another thing I have for the Copics is just the generic Copic chart, and this just tells me every color that I have, and I can sort of look and see which colors look good together, and then I go pull them from my collection. I also have one for the Inktense pencils. I have them colored here, and then I watercolor them out to the side so I can see what they look like with water and without. And then finally, I have my Distress inks. I colored little pieces of paper with all the different colors that I have, and then I actually used Tombow Mono Multi-Glue, which you can actually pull these off. So I can pull this off, broken china, and see, you know, which one it looks good with, see what I want to match it up with. Like, I don't think it looks good with this, but I think it looks pretty good with that, and I can put it back. I could do the same thing with the Chipped Sapphire. Maybe I want to move my Victorian Velvet over here and kind of match these up, and then they go right back on my sheet. Okay, so anyway, that's what I use to figure out color. Now, if you're still having trouble, some sources to go to would be Pinterest, and it doesn't have to be cards on Pinterest. It could be living rooms, it could be kitchens, it could be recipes, I mean food, it could be anything, bedrooms. I actually really like the Pottery Barn catalog. So I look at the regular catalog, I look at the teen, I look at the kids' Pottery Barn. They have really good color combinations in there. And then just magazines, your Paper Crafts magazine or Better Homes and Gardens or whatever you have laying around. Just flip through the pages and see what kind of pops out at you. And if it's pleasing to your eye, it probably is a good color combination. Okay, the next thing I'm going to go over is layout considerations. So the first and foremost, the most important rule is to have a single focal point. So your eye should be drawn to one part of your card. You shouldn't be having conflict between two different elements on your card where your eye doesn't know where to go first. Your eye should be drawn to one part of your card. So let me show you some examples. Here's a butterfly card. The focal point here is the butterfly. So it's bright blue, it's got some gold on it. I have a little bit of blue around it, but then the rest is gray. And so that creates my eye point right here. Another example is this cupcake. So my focal point obviously is the cupcake. That's where your eye goes. And I'm accentuating it by having this frame around it. But then my background is very, very subtle. And so your eye is not really looking in the background. It's drawn straight to the cupcake and it stays there. In some instances, oh here, I'm going to tell you one more. So this, the focal point is this area right here where I have my hearts and my banner here. I do have color here, but it's more of a background. And then I added some white, white on white, so it's a very, very subtle extra element to my card that doesn't draw my eye away from my main area here. Sometimes your focal point will actually be a background. In this example, my focal point is the background, the flowers in the background. So when I put my sentiment on there, I didn't want to distract it all, so I put it on vellum, and I made it very simple. Here's another example where the background is the focal point. So my eye is drawn to the pattern in the back, so when I put a sentiment on, I made it small, I made it very simple. So that's my number one consideration, is to have a single focal point. Another consideration is to not be afraid to leave white space. It's okay to leave something blank. This is really hard for me to do as well because I like to fill in areas that look empty. But here's a good example of a very simple card I made where my focal point is right here. These sort of fade into the background and then that's it. I just have a very simple card with a white background. I could have filled this up with stripes or a background pattern, but it just looks better just by itself. Another card with a lot of white space. My focal point is right here. It kind of fades out a little bit using this line. And then I accentuate it on the outside with this outline, which I tend to do a lot. I left a bunch of white space in there. Here's another clean and simple card. So I have my element, my focal point right here, and then I just left the rest blank. I didn't even draw my typical lines around here. So this one was a pretty clean and simple card and very hard for me to do actually. Here's yet another example. I've got a lot of white space up here and at the bottom. I could have filled it up with maybe some smaller hearts or something like that, but then that's getting a little bit carried away. So I just left it the way it was, kind of almost like the card is really just in between this twine. So anyway, those are some examples of just using your white space. Another design consideration is to try to contain or ground your card elements. So let me show you, the best thing to do is to just show you examples here. So I contained my element, my butterfly here, by having it sort of like surrounded by something. So this is surrounded, so I don't have it kind of white off. I've got kind of a border here. And that's the way I tend to design my cards, is to have it contained. So this little girl is contained inside this box, okay? And then I ground her by not floating in the middle, but having this in the background that sort of grounds her to something. So she's sort of attached to something. This, I contained all my elements within this square here. So I've got my 8-ball and all the different sentiments, and it's all contained. And then I even have another box around it to contain the white area. Another example is I contained all my elements within this box, and I do have a background here, but I used some white space inside and kept all of my elements inside this box. Again, all of the elements are combined within this box, and then I have this border around here that contains my elements. And when I say ground your elements, I mean kind of attach them to something so you don't have something floating. In this situation here, I've got the candle that's sort of attaching itself. With this, I have my sentiment that's attaching to my heart, so it's not just floating out there. So it's funny because I didn't realize I was following these design thoughts until I actually went back and started looking at all my cards. So anyway, so that's a good one, is to contain your elements or ground your elements in some way. Okay, another design consideration is to balance the elements on your card. So make sure that you have one side just as filled as the other side. You don't have kind of too much weight on one side of your card. So I'll show you a few examples of that. So we have this one, which has the flower on this side and the sentiment on this side. So you're kind of balancing this side, this corner with this corner. Okay. This one is just the opposite. I have my girl here and my sentiment here, so I'm balancing it out. Okay. This one has my focal point, but then it also has something on this side. So it kind of balances to having my sentiment right there. This one, same thing. I've got my object here, I've got my sentiment here, so I have a balance. This one, I have my owl on this side with the moon, and then I have my sentiment on this side. Again, the balance. With this one, I have the I and the U sort of balancing on each side of the heart. And then I have the top and also the bottom so that it balances out the card because I've got something in the middle. So anyway, that's about balancing. All right, another thing to think about is your shapes. You want to keep your shapes consistent. So for example, in this card I used hearts, hearts, and hearts to keep my shapes consistent. In this example, I use hearts and then I have hearts on the inside, but my cutout here is a circle because my hearts are rounded and so my circle is rounded, and that sort of keeps the roundness of it. This one is an example of I have all my squares, so they're sharp edges, and then I have the outline here, which is more of a sharp edge. And this is sort of keeping in that same style. And in this owl card, I have the circle of the moon, and then the roundness of this edge here, and that sort of keeps things consistent. Another thing you want to think about is keeping the style of your card consistent. So think about what style your card is. Is it clean? Is it young? Is it elegant? Is it serious? Is it cute? And just make sure all your elements match that. So for example, this card is more of a young card. It's got kind of a cute whimsical sentiment, and I've got the blocks here in the background. I wouldn't want to put this type of font on something like this. So this, you're going to have more of a script font. It's a little more elegant. You've got the script writing in here, so you want to kind of make sure that that matches. And then, for example, this one is more of a serious card, so I've got some script going here. You wouldn't want to put a whimsical font or anything like that on a card like this. So anyway, just try to keep the same style throughout. Okay, now as far as number of elements, I try to keep them odd. So for example, this one has 3 balloons. So 3, 5, 1 works better than 2, 4, 6. In this one, I use 3 colors, okay? And so I'm using sort of this odd notion. This one, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 flowers visible. And so again, it's got an odd. This one, I have 3 hearts, odd. This one, I'm adding some details here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of my little pearls here. So 5. Anyway, so odd is a good number to go with. So if you're ever in doubt, stay away from even, try to go with odd. Okay, so you're going to keep all these considerations, design considerations in mind. And then, you're designing your card and you think, okay, is it done? Should I stop? Should I keep going? And you always have this urge to just add more, right? So what I would suggest is that right before you think you're done, but you're not quite done, just stop, walk away, and then come back a little while later, a few hours, the next day or whatever, and take another look at your card. Because most often, rather than not, it's already done. You think it's not done, but it is done, because it's better to stop a little bit earlier than adding too much. Now, I do really love to add details. And what I recommend with details is to make them very small and quiet, sort of more background. So let me show you some examples. With this card, I added some star details. Very small, very faded into the background, so you don't really notice it. They don't catch your eye. You just sort of notice them maybe afterward as you're kind of looking at the card. Back to this card again, I have my pearls. They're added later, small detail. I've also got some glitter here. That's sort of part of my background, but it's not a focal point. These penny black cards that I made, I added the twine and just a little pearl, just a little detail, but you don't even notice it until after you've already noticed my focal point, which is the background here. With this one, after I did the little arrows here, I thought, gosh, I need something just a little bit. So I added one little star to the end of each one of these and just added just a little bit of detail without changing the focal point. So that's just what you want to keep in mind when you're adding your details. Well, I hope all these tips helped you in some little way, and I will see you next week in my videos.